This is Leafs Morning Take with Nick Alberga and Jay Rosehill.
Now we've got a fight started here right off the bat with Rosehill.
30 minutes of live, nonstop Leafs talk starts now.
Well, the dust has settled on another locker cleanout day in Toronto, and trust me when I tell you there's a lot to dive into. Presented by Botano, it's a Tuesday edition of Leafs Morning Take. Nick Alberga and Jay Rosehill with you. Rosie, I know you're off yesterday. How are you feeling since Friday, buddy?
Oh, it's settled in and, probably feeling better than those players having to go through and do that shit and do the media and the whole rigmarole circus. So, I don't know. I think it's kind of set in with everybody that she's over, and it's over for a lot of teams right now. There's 4 left, so.
The old car wash, locker cleanout day. What's that like from a player's perspective?
Yeah, it's weird, really. It's weird going to the rink and seeing everybody, but not having to prepare, not having to focus on anything, not having a job to do. You kind of go there in your flip-flops and your shorts, and the weather's kind of nice, and nobody's overly happy to be there, but it's just a different feeling. It's just a once-a-year type thing where most teams go through it, where you go to the rink after having not won and getting beat out in one way or the other, and you go pack your shit. And then in that league and in that market, you got to talk to the media and you got to answer questions, and it's kind of painful.
Some guys did pack their shit. Can confirm that. And a lot to get to from locker cleanout day, so we won't waste any time. Remember to subscribe, tap that like button, leave us a review wherever you're checking us out at the Leafs Nation 401, where you could subscribe on YouTube. If you're watching right now and are not subscribed, what are you doing? At the Leafs Nation 401 to subscribe, like, share, whatever helps the algorithm at this point. Additionally, we're available wherever you find your podcast. Just search Leafs Morning Take. Don't forget to visit theleafsnation.com for the very latest on all things Toronto Maple Leafs. The team over there has done a tremendous job of just fostering content the last couple days and generating anything you can think of right now at theleafsnation.com. Thoughts, comments, questions, or concerns, you can drop us a line in the chat down below, as many of you already have here. And we'll share them a bit later on the show, as we do once a show here. But without further ado, let's get over the boards. I was laughing the other day. Somebody in the comments section did not like our graphic, did not like the sound for over the board. So maybe that's an off-season change. There's going to be change in Toronto. Maybe we see some changes to our graphics next year, Rosie.
Yeah, I don't know. That guy was passionate about it. He said it absolutely has to go. And I mean, man, you can tell it's bringing the show down big time.
Yeah, that graphic, man, just viewership has been so down since we brought the graphic in on day one. No, it hasn't. Anyways, let's get to locker cleanout day, Rosie. There's so many areas we can start. For me, accountability is a big word I grabbed from the day, and I don't know if you agree. I think these guys have been coached up since they got to Toronto. I'm talking about the core guys, where they said the bare minimum. I know people were excited over some of the comments, and we'll get to them, like guys staying. Everybody wants to be a Leaf. Like, they're going to tell the media what they want to hear. And again, you can agree to this. You can confirm this being a former player. You're going to tell the media what they want to hear, and you're going to get the hell out of there, right?
Yeah, it's pointless interviews, man, because, on one hand, you need time to process. You got to kind of get out of the city almost and get out of your condo or whatever the hell you're living in, get home, get unpacked, get kind of figured out and situated and have the season behind you. And then you can really reflect on, where am I? What do I want to do? What does this look like? What did I like about the season? What didn't I like? You're going to talk to your agent. He's going to say, these are the comparables for you this year, whether you're a UFA especially. And, it's going to be like, here's your position here. This is what we expected from the year. This is what happened. Here's your comparables is the big thing as far as what you're worth, what years you're going to have. We're waiting for this guy to sign. If he signs for this is going to help you out big time. They're really high on you. They want to get it done before July 1, blah, blah, blah. Whatever the situation is, that's when you can really, divulge into that a little bit more and start to figure out where your head's at. But as far as what those Leafs have been doing the last handful of days, you go out with the guys, you're never going to have that group together again. And no matter how the season went, you spent a lot of time with those dudes. So you go out for your dinners and you crank some beers and, you got a bunch of logistic stuff you're handling, and it's kind of a whirlwind. So to step into that dressing room and say, this is what I want, it's stupid. And even if you do know what you want and you're very clear, you're not going to kind of show your hand as far as bargaining power and whatnot. And that's where the business of the whole sport
Yeah.
comes into play, and where it really shows its head as far as it being, business and contracts and money and blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of a moot point to ask those guys those questions. I never really listened to it, to be honest, because it's just always complete bullshit.
It was so scripted, man. And for me, the thing that got me, that killed me, was like the general acceptance of losing. And having said that, I don't know what the response would be, but like I would love some pushback. Somebody say, we're not good enough. We weren't good enough. We're disappointed. But all I heard, dude, was a team that believes in themselves and they want to run it back. Like I'm just hearing the wrong things. Like I don't even know how to compare it, but if you heard exit interviews from like Boston or other teams that thought they had a legitimate shot at going all the way this year, it's just night and day. Like there's just this general acceptance that losing's okay in this market, and I hate it.
It's kind of weird because at the end of the year, no matter how it goes, it's like once it's done, it's done. Like as soon as that buzzer goes, you're in the locker room and you're taking your gear off. There's no more meetings. There's no more talk. Like the group is almost like dismantled. You'll never play another game. You'll never prepare for another game. So there's no time to really sit down and like talk about what went wrong. Why did we lose? Like, why are we not still playing? The meetings are over. There's never a time to sit down with the group and figure out why you lost. And I think it's kind of it would be hard to do because some guys are like, I'm fucking out of here as soon. Like some guys aren't happy with their playing time, or some guys are waiting to get out of there. Some guys' contracts are up and they know they're going, whatever. So you're like, sit down, we're going to watch some video, or sit down, we're going to talk about, what happened. They're going to be like, fuck you, man, I'm off the clock. So it's kind of a weird time of year, but it would be super beneficial for a group like that to sit down and to actually verbalize, why aren't we winning? Why aren't we still playing? What happened? And if they could sit there and come to grips with, we didn't battle hard enough. Like, I think that's the consensus around Leafs Nation on why they're not playing. Like, they didn't have that, use any friggin' adjective you want, like the killer instinct, the jam. They didn't have the grit, the sandpaper. They didn't have the toughness, the team toughness. They didn't have whatever you want to call it. I think that's where they keep falling short. You can have all the firepower in the world offensively, but when the going gets tough and you're kind of in a battle, in a war, and the playoffs are just that, they're a completely different beast, you probably maybe can't use that offensive power just the way you did all regular season long. And I think that's what the Leafs have run into as far as their problem on not getting it done in the playoffs. Sure, you can put up 115 points in the regular season. It's a lot easier in the regular season, and you got a long time to kind of chip away. And then boom, the playoffs come and it's do or die, and you get down 3 games and you got to win now, and it's just too hard. And if your group and your nucleus doesn't have that jam, you're just not going to get it done. And it's just, do they know that? Do they talk about that? Is that addressed? I just don't think it is.
In general, I just think that the give a shit meter, like it doesn't seem like anybody's like pissed. Like, growing up when you lose a big game in your hockey career or whatever sport you play, and you're pissed, you're huffing and puffing, you don't even want to talk to your old man or your parents on the drive home. I don't get that sense when these guys lose. And again, they're not the only team in the league, but there's like that give a fuck meter's not there for me. Like, and I know it was exit interviews and you're not going to say much and they're so coached up and all that, but just, I would just have loved it if one guy said, you know what, not good enough. We weren't good enough. Something needs to change with this team. And we didn't get that, quite frankly. Again, we got the whole cliche answer is, we believe in this team. We believe in this core. I want to stay in Toronto. Like, it was the same old BS we see every year, man.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I remember being on the other side of it, and like during those interviews, you don't want to say anything that could get construed in a different way. So you keep it to the generic BS. And it's because of that market. It's because there's literally 30 friggin' cameras in your face and 40 microphones. And you don't want to be the soundbite of the day. And you will be if you go off script. And I remember that. And it's like, guys, I believe guys are pissed and guys are choked and guys are like, I can't believe this fucking happened again. And, but they're not going to go on camera and show it because it's Toronto, and you're not going to tip your hand and be the soundbite of the week. So I think that's why they give that type of answers and that type of attitude. But being on the other side of it, on the other side of the mic and like wanting that information out of that group, it's kind of like, well, give us something. Like, how do you really feel? Like, that was a bullshit answer. Like, why don't you see more? You know what I mean? So I see both
Yeah.
sides of it, but I do think that part of that reason they're not showing the emotion is because when anybody has in the past, it's been blown up, whether it's for good or bad or whatever that is. You can get it twisted however the hell you want. But I think guys protect themselves from showing too much personality or emotion, especially in this market. And I remember that feeling.
So everything, or the majority of everything that was said, was inconsequential, and again, I don't think not much was said in this situation. But I think the one thing that came to mind, and the one thing that certainly resonated, was Kyle Dubas and him speaking. And so we wanted to play a clip from the presser yesterday, and we'll build off that. So first and foremost, here's the clip.
With regards to my own situation, I'll just address it off the top. Had a good long relationship here with Brendan and the owners. I'll speak to them in the coming days, but probably more importantly, speak to my wife Shannon and our family here tonight and tomorrow, and see where we're at as a family, and how we want to proceed with everything. This has been and just in learning the past couple of days, has been a very taxing year on them, and that's obviously very important to me.
Very rarely do you see the vulnerable side of Kyle Dubas, and that was a bit of what he had to say yesterday. Very emotional, as he mentioned, very taxing situation for his family. And so as we have this conversation, the Leafs don't know who their GM is moving forward, Rosie.
Yeah, it's something. I mean, a pretty honest interview, man. And you don't usually hear guys talk that heavily about their family and stuff, but obviously that's a priority to him. And I think he's just being honest. He's saying, like, he's the kind of guy where if he's going to do a job, especially a big kind of, important job like being the GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs, I imagine he dives in head first, both feet, and goes hard at it. And I bet you that is very difficult on his kids and his wife, because I bet he's a ghost for 8 months of the year.
Yeah.
And in order to do that again, I think that he genuinely needs to take some time off and say, how much is that affecting that situation? And are we willing to do it again? He flat out said, I'm not going anywhere else. That's pretty interesting. He showed his hand in that. So I guess Toronto's got to decide, do we want this guy to be a GM or do we go find somebody else? And personally, I think I'm on team Dubas as far as him being a guy that can get the job done. I think that he was a little bit misguided in his identity of this team. I think he went a little bit too heavy on, offense and, in return softness. And maybe they need to readjust that. But as far as putting names on paper and making the calls and getting the deals done and the trades and the acquisitions and the signings, I think he's as good as anyone out there. And I don't believe in making changes for the sake of making changes. I think it's because you know what you want and it's different than what you have, and you go out and you get it. So in my mind, Dubas, I don't think he should go anywhere else. I hope they have a talk about what their team identity is and what it takes to win a Stanley Cup and what playoff hockey is like and where they've fallen short. And I hope they adjust accordingly. But as far as unloading him and going to find a new guy, I just think, oh, fuck, now we're kind of starting over. And this new guy that comes in is going to want to put his fingerprints on the team, and it's going to want to be his DNA, and he's not going to want to ever say that, it was Dubas's work that got the job done of it. He's going to make some big changes, and it just feels like, oh man, it feels like we take a big step back if we fire Dubas and hire some other unknown man.
Yeah, to me, you got to keep him. And again, this will come down because he is a free agent, and he did go on to say that it's going to be Toronto or nowhere else. Like if he doesn't re-sign, he'll take a step back. So he's like, don't expect me to pop up elsewhere. I know the rumors have been there with Pittsburgh, so those were laid to rest. But for me, I think the big thing is how much he hinges upon Austin Matthews' future. I mean, it's quite clear, dude, listening to the remarks, the players believe in Kyle Dubas, whether it was Morgan Riley yesterday or Mitch Marner or Nylander or Austin Matthews. And I think if it means re-signing Austin Matthews, I think you have no choice but you bring Kyle Dubas back. And to your point, I don't think he's done a bad job. I just know that it's a business and it's a results-oriented business, and the results haven't been there. Regardless of what they say, they are nowhere close to winning a Stanley Cup. They've never been anywhere close to winning a Stanley Cup. Last time I checked, they still needed 11 more wins. So this notion that this team is even remotely close to winning a Stanley Cup is just incorrect at this point in time. I think it's so hard to win in this league. Having said that, I think somebody takes the fall for this, the scapegoat, if you will. I think ultimately, unfortunately, I think it's going to be the head coach. I think maybe I read more into it than most people yesterday, but the fact that Brendan Shanahan did not speak is very, very telling in my world. Very similar to the NBA, where Masai Ujiri didn't speak for a couple of days, and he ended up, Nick Nurse is now gone with the Raptors. So that's my expectation. The other curious thing for me from what Dubas said yesterday was the fact that anything is possible. Like, this is the first time under my recollection that he didn't go as far as to say that anybody's safe, and he didn't hold anything back. Like, Matthews, anything. And that's the curious thing for me.
Yeah, and I like that. I think it's honest. I think they don't know what they're going to do, and they still need to decide. I think up until 5 days ago, they were, still in line to challenge for the Stanley Cup. So those massive decisions, I don't think you make on a dime. And I think that they genuinely did believe, and they thought they could, get to the Eastern Final, and anything's possible, and blah blah. And when that gets taken away and the reality hits, I don't think the answers are right in front of you. Like, oh, I was prepared for this. I knew what I was going to do the whole time. I think they really got to stop and reflect. But I do know, like, talking about Matthews and whatnot, that the way Dubas handles the players and in that organization is nothing short of like first bloody class. Like, Shanner told me, he goes, you wouldn't believe this guy and what he knows all the kids' names and the wives' names. He knows who's where, what's going on. Can I get you this? Can I get you that? How's the house? I checked it out. Bubble. Like, he is so hands-on, and he cares about the players, and he's a genuine guy. He's the furthest thing from like a meat factory, GM, where it's just like churning over names on paper, doesn't give a shit about anything about them personally. He's the opposite of that, and everything about that Toronto Maple Leafs organization, to their credit, is that way. So I imagine these players do want him around and to keep him, especially if he's the one that brought him in. Whether they know beforehand, well, Austin might not sign with us if we don't have Kyle Dubas, I don't think anyone's going to show their hand that hard. I think Brendan Shanahan and the ownership's just going to have to decide, is this on Kyle or not? And my opinion is that it's not.
Yeah, I'm with you. Again, there's going to be a scapegoat. I don't think it's going to be Kyle Dubas, and I do think it'll be up to him. We even heard, from Elliot Friedman the last couple of days that it sounded like they were making progress on an extension. So this sort of came out of nowhere. And I get it. Like, I'm the first to admit it. You have to humanize the situation sometimes, man. Like, these are humans. It is a taxing job. You know how much pressure they face on a daily basis, especially in this market. Let's look at this show and every day what we bring to the table in terms of how much pressure we put on this team to be successful when it matters most. So that's the most important takeaway for me, is to make sure Kyle Dubas is A-okay. And I'm not just saying that. Like, that's important. But then number two, you have to decide what's going on with the GM moving forward. But I still have the belief that Dubas is going to be back. Austin Matthews had some comments yesterday that raised some eyebrows again. I don't know what he was going to say to the contrary, but this is a bit of what he had to say yesterday.
My intention is to be here. I think I've reciprocated that before, how much I enjoy playing here and what it means to me, and the organization, my teammates, and how much I just enjoy being here. So,
how important to get that done before next season?
Yeah, I think that it's important, and it'll all kind of work itself out in due time, and just kind of go from there. But as far as everything else goes, I mean, it's like I've said before. I mean, I really do enjoy playing here, and it's a true honor. And the work that we're putting in to obviously continue to strive for that end result is extremely motivating.
So, Rosie, is it a foregone conclusion he's re-signing July 1st? What'd you make of that?
Yeah, I believe he's the mainstay, right? I think he's the guy that's going to stick around. I think he's the best player on the roster. I think that they're going to, whether they break up the core in some way, shape, or fashion, is yet to be seen, but I don't believe it's going to start with him by any stretch. I think that they like him there. I think that, you look at Ovechkin, I mean, right now he just looks like this icon. He's one of the greatest goal scorers of all time, Stanley Cup champion. But people forget how many times they failed in the playoffs, how many times he didn't get it done, couldn't score that big goal, couldn't lead the charge, blah, blah, blah. And then he wins one. I mean, when did he start playing? In like 04 or 05, and took him
Yeah,
like 15 years to win a Stanley Cup, or maybe not quite, but 13 maybe. And
13. Yeah.
it's not easy, and it takes some growth, and you got to have the right formula around you. And no one in Toronto is is ready to wait anymore. I understand that, but you got to understand he's still a pretty young player. He's still growing, and sometimes it takes a guy a while to figure out what playoffs look like, what they feel like. I mean, those series is come and go. It's a blur of a week, and he's only had a handful of them to understand what happens. And I imagine he does want to stay here. If he left and went somewhere else, I think it'd be a big letdown for him. You wouldn't be in the big show anymore. You wouldn't be the big ticket item anymore if you go to fucking Columbus or someplace, and you'd feel like you kind of failed, right? And I don't think these guys get to the level that they play at by being used to just accepting failure. And I think he does want to stick around. And even though they're not jumping off up and down saying, "Oh, this isn't good enough," and we is unacceptable, and we need to overhaul. They're not going to say that in the media, but I do believe they feel that, and they're like, they want to win in Toronto as much as anybody. If you want a Stanley Cup in Toronto, I mean, just look at the guys that played 40 years ago. They're still gods, and they didn't win anything. Imagine you win here the rest of your life. You'd be a walking god in Toronto. You could do whatever you wanted. I mean, these guys like that shit. That's why they get as good as they do and try to become what they want to become, is because they appreciate that competition and winning and being the man. And I think that he wants to stick around, and there's positives and negatives to playing in Toronto, and he knows that as much as anybody. But I believe him when he says the things that he says about wanting to stick around and be a Maple Leaf.
So you could probably answer this better than most people, considering you've been in that room, you've been in this league. But how would you feel about a captaincy change? Like, I do think something needs to change in the dynamic of this team, whether it's a big trade. I do think they need to make a big trade, and we'll address that at some point in time here in the offseason. Something needs to change. Like, something is off. And maybe if it's even as something as small as a captaincy change, how much of a difference would that make in a room if they elected to say, hey, JT and Matthews, we're going to switch you up an A to a captain?
Yeah, I've heard
Not
that
much.
before. I don't know, man. I mean, I don't think you do it unless you don't have John Tavares there anymore. I just don't think you do. I think it would be too much of a story. It would ruffle some feathers. I mean, it's not about scoring the most goals to win that C.
Yeah.
It's about how you conduct yourself and who is actually like the dad of the team, the leader, the guy that, when a decision needs to be made or the whip needs to be cracked, or, hey, smarten up and get the hell over here for a workout or something. It's someone that everyone kind of listens to. And that is John Tavares. And I think that he is the
It is.
consummate professional. And I think he's professional to the point where he's boring as hell, but that's irrelevant. He does everything right. If you get a young guy, why do you think they put Matthew Nyes in John Tavares' basement and not in Austin Matthews' basement? It goes
True.
without saying. The guy does everything right. He is the consummate professional, and whether he scores 40 goals or wins a Stanley Cup, it doesn't really change that fact. You want him to lead the team. You want him to be the voice that, when he speaks, people listen. And I don't think changing that, like, I agree, maybe an Austin Matthews or a guy needs to wear that C, but I think in due time, you've committed to John Tavares. He is the guy that does things the right way, that you want the younger guys to look and see and take note of how he operates. And I don't think that anything gets benefited, too much more by swapping that. I think you get more negative from talking about, ooh, John got his C stripped. That's going to be the
Yeah.
headline, not, oh, Austin can take control of this thing. And it's just a freaking letter on your jersey at the end of the day. I don't think it carries enough to warrant that change in my mind. That's not saying it's not going to happen, but I just don't think I would make that move.
I'm interested to see what people in the chat right now, and it's on fire, how you feel about that. Would you make a change to the captaincy? Would you give it to Matthews? Would you give it to somebody else? So please chime in with your thoughts. Again, my apologies, dealing with a bit of a flu bug and some scratchiness in my throat here, but we're trucking right along. The Botano wrap-up is presented by Botano.ca. The game starts now, 19 plus. Please play responsibly. And for today's look, Rosie, we're going to look at the 4 teams remaining. So Carolina, Vegas, Dallas, and Florida. Simple question for you. Who do you like to win the Stanley Cup this year?
Personally, I would like to see Dallas win the Stanley Cup, but I think that the Carolina Hurricanes are going to win it. I think it's going to come out of the East, and I think that they are just kind of that quiet powerhouse that has been strong and getting stronger for a few years now. And I just think that the way those guys are operating, they seem very tight. They seem very tight knit, collected, calm, and powerful. And, if Bobrovsky doesn't continue to play the way he has, which he hasn't played this way in 5 some years, maybe more, if he cools off a little bit, I think that
Yeah.
could spell the end of this magical run for the Florida Panthers. Again, I could be wrong, but my money is on the Carolina Hurricanes.
I like it. Can't go wrong with that pick. I like Dallas and Florida, my Stanley Cup final. I love the Pete DeBoer revenge narrative against Vegas. He used to coach the Florida Panthers as well. And I just have to ride with the Florida Panthers. I just feel like they're a team of destiny. The way they took care of Boston late in that series, they beat the Maple Leafs quite handily. Now you're playing a Carolina team. I think it comes down to offense. Goaltending is going to be huge in that series, so I wouldn't sleep on the Florida Panthers either. But again, it's a very different look to the conference finals this year than we've seen in recent memory, isn't it?
Yeah, big time. Look at those logos, man. We haven't seen any of those
It's
guys
nuts.
raise the cup, and since I guess '06 with Carolina, but that's pretty cool. It's nice to have,
Yeah,
I know that as far as the salary cap being raised and blah, 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 would a Toronto Edmonton final have been a lot better? Yeah, it sure as hell would have.
probably.
But I
Yeah.
mean, there was a few decades there where it seemed like the same 2, 3 teams won the cup every single year, whether it was, LA or Chicago or Pittsburgh. And to get some new blood in there is not a bad thing. I don't think it's interesting to watch and, lots of narratives to follow along with. But that being said, this wouldn't be my first choice in conference finals, to be honest with you.
All right, let's look at the chat now. Split Finger writes in kind of over this score, and I think that seems to be the consensus. And I was a bit befuddled to hear people say and wonder if Austin Matthews should get traded. Like, that's the one untouchable for me of this team. And granted, again, a lot will stem on July 1 if they can re-sign him. If not, then maybe they're going to be pinned into a corner. But that's the last guy I'd be talking about. And the fact that they didn't say he was untouchable tells you all you need to know about how they feel about this team right now and how they should feel about this team. Samuel Perron writes in trade for Roman Josi. I don't think Nashville is going to do that, but I just think right away you're hearing the names, right? You're hearing Travis Konechny, you're hearing Tom Wilson, like that style of player. But it always seems like we're having this conversation every year where they're not gritty enough, or there's not enough sandpaper in that lineup. We thought they addressed that, getting Ryan O'Reilly and guys like Noel Acciari, right?
Yeah, they did. And I mean, Ryan O'Reilly wasn't that big of a factor in the playoffs, especially the second round. I do think that you need to add a bigger piece, like a piece that's part of the core four. I don't think they can be supporting roles that's going to get it done in the playoffs. And I think that you need to alter it. You need to alter it. And I'll just say it right now. Mitch Marner is my guy to go. I think that he can go. I just don't think that he has the style of play to get it done in the playoffs. I think he's far from it. I don't think he has enough jam pushback. I don't think he can play in the tough areas, in the tough games when the going gets tough. I think that he reverts back to what he's good at, and what he's good at isn't playoff hockey. And I think that's kind of proven. And is Mitch Marner a phenomenal hockey player? Yes. If he goes on to a different team, will he have a phenomenal career? Yes. All those things are true, but if you want to win a Stanley Cup and you have all these guys that are quite similar in play and have proven now that together they don't have the style of play to win a Stanley Cup in the playoffs, it's not gritty enough, it's not battle ready, then you got to make a change. And Mitch Marner's stock is very high. You can get a huge return for him. And I think that if you can put together a deal where you complement the remaining 3 guys or whatever it is, but you get yourself more of a playoff ready team like the Florida Panthers are this year, and you can kind of address that identity issue, then to me, he's kind of the guy that can go. I don't think anyone's going to take John Tavares' contract. I don't think you can move him, or you might try. And I think Willie Nylander has got too much upside. He's too young, and he has been performing in the playoffs compared to the other guys. So that's my pick for that to change. But I do agree, this core four, you can't just go back into the fucking season next year with this same four and just expect that they're just going to score tons of goals in the playoffs and battle and grind and get it done and beat legit playoff hockey teams. They've proven that that's not going to work for more than 1 year now. So I don't say blow it up. I don't say dismantle it, but I say you need to make a pretty heavy tweak to it to get this organization to, be less soft.
Samuel Perron's on fire, and I agree with everything you just said, by the way. But Samuel Perron writing, and hire Patrick Waugh. This guy has the passion to win. Imagine Patrick Waugh in Toronto and beloved Montreal Canadian at that, and Colorado Avalanche. I just don't know how that fit would look, but I understand what you're saying. You want some passion, you want some fire in this market, some accountability. And again, we talk about this on a daily basis. It's just a much different era and generation of player, man. Like, just the way you have to coddle these guys as opposed to what it was even back in your playing days is a lot different. So I get that. A lot of people happy about Morgan Rielly's play. Like, that's the one guy I thought really came out yesterday and had something to say and was allowed to say something because he was incredible in the playoffs.
Yeah, he's got a leg to stand on, right? And
Yeah.
while having kind of a subpar regular season, he stepped up in the playoffs in a big way and showed why he is that, top 10 pick and franchise defenseman and whatever else you want to say. But I mean, that's the way to do it, to kind of save yourself for the playoffs. It seems like, in recent years, everyone's done the complete opposite and had standout, breakout, record-setting regular seasons and just shits their pants in the playoffs, which is not something, not a recipe for success in the long run. So, he can say what he wants to say. And, I know these new age players, you got to coddle them and this and that, but I feel like more than ever, I have noticed in hockey the difference between the regular season and the playoffs, and it's drastic. And the teams that fold and go away are the teams that just look at the faces on the Toronto Maple Leafs during the playoffs. When there's a scrum or anything, they're just kind of looking around like this, and they're just,
What do we
and
do?
then other guys are just like, are you fucking, like, you need that FU, that intensity, and we just don't have any of it. And it's just wave after wave. It overwhelms you until you're just shut down and you're done and you lose. And you try to push back. You're too far down in the trenches already, and you can't climb out. And that's what happens to them every year. So I really think that you have to build a team focusing on the playoffs. I think that the difference between regular season and playoffs is as big as it's ever been. Maybe it's just because I've been watching more and been close to it, but it is very obvious and very apparent to me. And I noticed that the teams that get it done have that jam and have that forge on, mentality of we're going to war. And we need that in this organization, or we're not going to win any more series than we have.
And again, the Florida Panthers set that template, and they actually, exactly, the snarl, the bite. And, they actually referenced it yesterday. I believe Kyle Dubas referenced the Florida Panthers in that template, but easier said than done. I mean, there's only one Matthew Tkachuk in the league. The other Tkachuk's on Ottawa. He isn't going anywhere. But yeah, I do tend to agree with you. And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to identify team needs. We'll talk about the core four. There's a lot to cover. And again, if you're tuning in for the first time at the Leafs Nation 401, where you could subscribe, we'll be with you Monday to Friday, 11 to 11:30 a.m. Eastern time, daily until July 2nd or 3rd, all the way through free agency. We'll scale things back in the summer. So again, we're just getting the conversation started when it comes to the postseason and the offseason at that. So we'll leave it at that. Many thanks to everybody in the chat today. Rosie, you brought it, and we'll chat tomorrow, bud.
Sounds good. I'll be here.
There you have it. The one and only Jay Rosehill. I'm Nick Alberga. Thanks so much for listening and watching. We'll talk tomorrow. Take care.